Joining us now, former presidential candidate himself and former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's good to be with you this morning.
So let's talk about last night for a second, because the Cruz campaign will tell you they have a path, and that path continued to show up last night with the victory in Utah. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think Utah was a big win for Ted Cruz. He can feel good about it. It was an unusual win. Utah is an unusual state. We haven't seen any evidence yet that that carries beyond Utah. The key, I think, is going to be Wisconsin. It's coming up in 2 weeks. It's an important state. It's a very diverse state, agriculture, industry, intellectuals. I think the question there is Cruz and Kasich both are sort of at a watershed. They need to be able to stop Trump in Wisconsin, or it begins to look, I think, pretty hopeless. So last night is not quite a draw. Ted Cruz did not win as many votes, as many delegates as did Donald Trump. And the fact is that Trump came one step closer to the nomination. He had a net gain of 58 to 40, and that means he actually got a bigger percent of total delegates last night than he needs based on various calculations. So now the question becomes, is there a state where Cruz and Kasich can actually stop him? I think Wisconsin's probably as good a shot as they're going to get. If they can't stop him in Wisconsin, I don't see the rationale for the campaign going much further.
Kagan.
Congressman, it's good to see you. After Wisconsin, should Kasich drop out?
Well, I think it depends on what happens in Wisconsin. Kasich has a legitimate right to run. I think he is a very, very desirable potential vice presidential candidate. And as long as Trump doesn't actually have the lock on delegates, there's always the possibility of some kind of negotiation. And if you're a guy in the room who has 160 or more delegates, you got something to negotiate with. I don't think he's going to be the nominee. I've said consistently, and Maria, remember, I've been on the show saying, there are only two people who are potential nominees now, and that's Trump and Cruz. And nobody else is seriously a potential nominee. You could imagine a world in which Kasich would run the table in, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut. But when you look at the polling numbers, for example, in New York, Trump is overpoweringly popular in New York, and that's a huge state. Yeah, you've been saying that a lot, actually. Well, let me ask you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, did the deadly attacks in Brussels yesterday have an impact at all in the voting last night? Obviously, immigration and this issue of understanding who's coming and going in this country has been Donald Trump's main centerpiece of his campaign. Well, tragically, I think the attacks in many ways validated Donald Trump's entire candidacy. I'll tell you, the most amazing column I've read this morning is by Piers Morgan, who had a 40-minute interview with Trump and goes through a whole series of Trump proposals and says, looking at the carnage in Brussels, maybe he's right. It is really a remarkable interview, and for Piers Morgan to come out and say that Trump may be the one guy who understands this, I thought was, I'm going to tweet it later on this morning, I thought it was really remarkable. And it tells you what's going on. You have Hillary Clinton, who was on a little while ago on videotape saying, oh, we shouldn't have leaders who tell us to be afraid. Well, how do you watch Brussels and not have some sense of fear? Right. So I think she sounds almost like she's in a fantasy world that doesn't connect to reality. Just to underline what you just said, there's a lot of people tweeting out this New York Times story that was published back in January. It was at the end of January, and the headline is, Donald Trump finds new city to insult, Brussels. Back in January, he was talking about how radicalized Brussels was becoming. One of Trump's strengths, and there are a lot of things with Trump that I can find fault with, but one of his strengths is to read the obvious. He's a little bit like Reagan in that sense. So he looked out, he saw what was happening. He knew that the people who had perpetrated the Paris atrocities, many of them had come from Brussels. He knew that the Malbec area of Brussels, in fact, had been heavily infiltrated by terrorists. And he has business friends who go to and from the European Union in Brussels, and his business friends are saying to him, it's out of control. So he reports the obvious. Everybody else thinks he's stupid because he's the only guy saying it. And now here we are several months later going, the fact is Donald Trump was right. Hillary Clinton was totally wrong, and it makes you question her connectivity to the real world. By the way, I know the FBI doesn't wrap up an investigation until they speak with the actual suspect. Do you think that the FBI is going to reach out to Hillary Clinton and ask her to do an interview? I would presume they will. I think they've been very thorough, very professional. and I think at some point they're going to have to. They're never going to get to closure until they talk to her. I don't know that they've yet talked to Huma Abedin and to Cheryl Mills, and I would think that that would be the step before talking to Hillary. But they clearly have been very thorough and very professional.
Mr. Speaker, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
We appreciate it. Newt Gingrich joining us there.